Art may very well be one of the most crucial spiritual disciplines our species engages in. While functional and utilitarian work is great and necessary, there is something sublime about the things we do for no other reason than to express ourselves. Art is the pursuit of externalizing the internal, of communicating something completely alien to communication itself. In short, to create art is to signify humanity. If you felt that this extremely pompous definition of art clashed with the goofy anime bullshit in the background, congratulations! Welcome to Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. As a series known for silly antics, Jojo is often disregarded as a funny meme show. And while it certainly isn't not that, I think there's much more one can extract from it than just dumb memes. To me, Jojo is one of the purest examples of artistic expression, an author, in this case Hirohiko Araki, going full stream of consciousness and just letting out all his thoughts and feelings regarding a particular topic, and also having a blast with it. And I want to be very clear, this artistic depth and merit I'm about to discuss in exhaustive detail isn't great despite the bizarre dumb shit of Jojo, but because of it. The cruelty and joy, the sorrow and the idiocy, the depth and the memes, these are all part of what makes Jojo so affecting in its core message. It simply would not work without both of these halves. But what is that core message? What is, to drop the title, the point of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure? Well, I'm gonna tell you. And not only that, but I'm going to go through each part and elaborate on how they each establish this point and how they iterate and expand on it in their own unique ways, up to and including part 6, because 7 and 8 are part of an unconcluded trilogy and are very separate from the original story. I do want to stress, however, that the point I'm going to discuss isn't like the objective truth of what Jojo actually means. I'm just another reader, and this video only constitutes one possible reading of the work. And most crucially, people aren't wrong for not liking or disagreeing with this interpretation. It's just one out of billions. Just thought we should be on the same page on that, you feel me? Anyway, buckle up, this will be a fat one. Timestamps are in the description, as is the Patreon, thank you very much for your support, and of course, full spoilers for both the anime and the manga. You have been warned. Let's do this. Phantom Blood is where it all begins, and luckily for us, meaning me, it is also a great starting point to begin investigating what Jojo is actually about. You see, despite being a fun and cool shonen romp, Phantom Blood is also kind of clumsy and awkward. You can tell Araki was still trying to get his bearings, which is good for us, because it means that the story is fairly blatant and open about its thematic aspirations. Phantom Blood is superficially a story of good versus evil, the kind and gentle Jonathan Joestar facing off against the monstrous and cruel Dio Brando. But I think we can specify it even more. It is specifically about the good within humanity versus the evil of forces beyond said humanity. After all, Dio is not just some bad dude, but a vampire, which is a literary trope loaded with meaning. The original Dracula by Bram Stoker alone may be interpreted as a metaphor for disease, sexual predation, racial politics at the time, or even just a diss track on rich people. That last one had a particular prevalence in some later vampire media, as using a blood-sucking parasitic monster that lavishes in extravagant castles and drains the literal life out of the working class is a pretty easy metaphor to impose on the aristocracy. Either way, vampires have often been used to describe various abstract evils that prey on the common man, and Dio in part 1 is no different. While the original manga doesn't dive too deeply into his motivations beyond greed and megalomania, the side novel Over Heaven by Nishio Isin focuses on that a little more. By the way, I'm gonna reference this book a few times, so if you want to check it out, I produced a full audiobook of it here on YouTube, link in the description. In Overheaven, Isin recontextualizes Dio's core motivations as more socio-economic than the manga did. In the novel, Dio describes how watching his father abuse his mother and the poverty it all happened in imprinted on him the idea of givers and takers. In life, some people are destined to always take, to always have what they desire, while others are condemned to always be stolen and taken from, to always have to give away all they have. Now, important to note here is that Dio didn't seem to be all that mad at this concept. To him, this was just the natural state of the world, and he outright admired his father somewhat due to how he was a taker. Dio's issue was his anxiety over whether or not he was a taker or a giver. He didn't mind a system of inherent inequality, he just wanted to make sure he was on the right side of it. It was this anxiety that fueled him to systematically seek dominance over everything and everyone. First his father, whom he killed and thus took from. But soon, Dio would expand his anxiety-driven ambition onto the entirety of English society, as to him, the rich were the ultimate takers. This is why he's so obsessed with usurping the Joestars, as fortune seems to him the only way to calm his pressure to always be on top. And of course, as you all know, he eventually further expands this ambition and decides to become the actual ultimate taker, a vampire, immortal and invincible. Part 1 Dio is, like many vampires before him, a grand other, a non-human entity defined by its singular desire to subjugate and control humans unjustly. But more than just an impulsive force, Dio is a calculated and highly philosophical other that uses its mind and strategy to continuously and solitarily advance in its conquest. Compare this with our force of good in this part, Jonathan Joestar. Due to being the very first Jojo, Jonathan can often feel like a bit of a vapid character with little motivation, mostly just reacting to Dio's various evils and trying to oppose him. But I think we can find meaning in this passive reactiveness. While Dio is an intensely cerebral and cunning villain, someone who at all times is deep in thought over his position and dominance over others, planning how to expand it, Jonathan is a sort of emotional opposite, a kind and openly empathetic giant whose greatest aspirations are to simply protect the innocent and the precious. And more crucially, Jonathan is willing to cooperate and learn from others, even those that would harm him, as is seen when he befriends the best girl in the entire series, Robert Speedwagon. Thus, Jonathan kind of becomes a symbol of emotional humanity, someone who isn't concerned with grand plans or schemes, but who is perfectly content with experiencing love and friendship, and yet sorrow and sacrifice alike. But more than just that, he is able to face all of it head-on, without succumbing to megalomaniacal temptations. He sees the world and the good and bad it can bring him, and simply chooses to keep walking among it, resolute to find happiness within this framework. Jonathan is a champion of what it means to simply be human, to simply exist as a weak entity empowered by resolve and community. Thus, the story presents its central conflict, and in doing so, its main theme. On one side, we have the cerebral, acidic solitude of Dio Brando, obsessed with the systems and schemes of this world to the point where he rejects all humanity and seeks to crown himself the sole king of all things. And on the other side, we have Jonathan, who is guided by his deep feelings and connections to his family, his loved one and his mentor, and for whom triumph simply means existing in happiness. This characterizes the conflict as the emotional human element versus the cunning inhuman other. This is even symbolized through the powers used in the battle. Dio is a vampire, a distorted otherworldly creature created through ancient and forbidden magic. Jonathan, meanwhile, wields the powers of earthly life itself, the sun that warms it, and the breath that unites the human body with all of nature. And through this, we have now extracted one of the points of Jojo. Jojo's bizarre adventure is fundamentally about humanity's struggle against otherworldly forces that would see it give in to systems such as subjugation and, on a larger scale, fate. More specifically, Jojo is about a positive perspective on humanity that defines itself as deeply resilient and powerful when united through a shared will to persevere, a will created by the ability to enjoy and endure life as it is, and to inherit and pass on this enjoyment. This Jojonian humanity is affirmed through clashes with inhuman forces that endeavor to either force humanity itself into a strictly defined and subjugated position or crown themselves arbiter of said humanity. To put it in the simplest ways possible, Jojo is about humanity persevering against the inhuman. And Part 1's Ballad of Two Brothers sets this up in the simplest iteration. Good versus evil, man versus vampire, empath versus strategist, the community versus the solitary. And while this is, in this form, a very simple and non-distinct core theme, later parts would build upon it significantly. Now, you may be wondering, Dennis, aren't you reading a little too much into what is basically a gothic Fist of the North Star ripoff? And to that I say, don't care, it's my video, bing bong, I'm in your walls. From the foundation that Phantom Blood laid down, the series was now free to further elaborate on how and why humanity perseveres against inhuman forces. Battle Tendency's very existence immediately got to work on this, in fact. Many stories that revolve around humanity's glory tend to center around one shared moment, an instant in time where we triumph over evil. And in isolation, that is kind of what Phantom Blood does. Jonathan sacrifices himself to ultimately stop Dio, an absolute affirmation of his humanity, as he lets his emotions guide himself to a true, selfless act of heroism. This one-timeness of the theme is generally not an issue. Movies and series naturally end, and with it, their thematic responsibility. And I don't think many stories that focus on this are worse because they imply that this human victory was a one-off thing. But I do think that there's potential in not limiting this theme to a one-time occurrence, potential that Jojo taps into. You see, Part 2 and Joseph's greatest achievement is in kickstarting what we now know as Jojo's anthological nature, the various parts that continue the story while not being directly connected beyond always featuring a Joestar or another recurring character. This reframes humanity's battle over the other as not just a one-time ballad of heroism and greatness, but an ongoing, continuous affair. In fact, one could say that within Jojo, humanity defines itself by this constant battle against forces greater than itself. However, this is, again, fairly vague, as we are still discussing the general notion of humans versus something bad. Jojo has laid the groundwork for saying something interesting, but is still somewhat trying to find the proper words to say it by the time Part 2 happens. I think a good way to explore the series and find those words is to look at what the Joestars are up against in each part. Every villain is, after all, heavily metaphorical, and from that, we can extract how Jojo defines humanity and its strengths, and what kind of evils that humanity can persevere against. By looking at the enemies, we can define our heroes. For one example, let's look at cars. The Pillarmen as a whole represent genetic superiority, as they are very explicitly perfections of the human form. Unnaturally jacked, even by Jojo standards, and in perfect control over every aspect of their biology, they are in no uncertain terms meant to represent true masters of the natural world. Cars himself completes this metaphor by infusing himself with the Super Aja and becoming a vessel for all genetic material on Earth, extinct and extant. So here we have our gang, our humans, pitted against a being that represents biological perfection, genetic supremacy in every way possible. But even so, Cars is defeated. Despite all of his superiority, he is ultimately thrown into the vast void of the cosmos, never to return, aside from that one really bad side novel. This establishes a key factor to Jojo's core theme. The humanity in its human versus inhuman conflict isn't strictly a biological humanity. Simply having the human genome doesn't guarantee that you'll inherit the spirit of what makes humanity so resilient and powerful. And conversely, not having a perfect body and genetic makeup doesn't disqualify you from it. To be human, spiritually, is something much grander than to simply biologically be a Homo sapiens. It's less so a state of matter, such as with cars, and more so a state of mind. But what exactly does that state of mind actually entail? That remains still fairly nebulous and generalized within Part 2. Through Caesar's sacrifice, we are introduced to the idea of the inherited spirit, that we humans can pass on our will to those who remain and strengthen it in the process, allowing our successors to go beyond the limits that vanquished us. So battle tendency gives us a key aspect of what defines humanity in Jojo. The ability to let our bonds empower us, to let our resolve influence the world even after our death. But more crucially, battle tendency detaches humanity from the purely biological shared genome, something that the series would continue to elaborate on. Which is to say, it does so immediately, as Part 3, Stardust Crusaders, literally starts by establishing that the closest of biological bonds, family, is not exclusive to the good spirit of humanity. Dio is back, and his reawakening and acquisition of a stand forces the power out in his living descendants, empowering some while deteriorating others. Here, the bond of family is explicitly made the antagonistic force, with Theo representing a sort of twisted familial authority, a patriarch who seeks to dominate the entire world and whose very existence demeans and harms those tied to him. So Jotaro must face him, take him down with the power of brutal violence. But more importantly, this is where the concept of the Joe Gang really starts forming, as the Stardust Crusaders are the first real group in the series. Jonathan's weird assembly of one-note characters and Joseph's gay boyfriend were certainly a start, but now we have an actual squad, with each member coming to Jotaro under different circumstances and for different reasons. But all of them, without exception, come through when the time for heroic resolve is nigh. This now properly introduces one of Jojo's key defining features of what gives humanity strength. Not just bonds, but bonds chosen and forged by that choice. The Stardust Crusaders come together as people not bound by anything but their mission, and in the process express some of the purest forms of humanity. True, genuine friendship, expressed through not just an abstract care that propels them forward, but through every moment they spend together. Their ironclad resolve in battle is as important to these bonds as is the dumb, goofy shit they get into during the part's downtimes. It's these interactions that further shape another key element that Part 3 introduces, their souls. Through the introduction of stands, which are soul power given form, the series now begins explicitly talking about the value and power of a soul. A person's soul determines not just their shonen battle power in Jojo, but also their ability to move forward against adversity. The Stardust Crusaders are defined by the quality of their souls, which cry out for companionship, justice, and unity. Specifically, however, it's not just the raw power of their stands and their souls that matters, because if it did, Dio would win by default, as he possesses the strongest stand in this part. Instead, what makes the Crusaders so powerful is how their souls and resolves combine. Kakyoin's resolve allows him to understand the world in its final moments, and Joseph transmits that message to Jotaro, while Iggy, Avdol, and Polnareff dispatch of Dio's most dangerous henchmen at the cost of limb and life. The Crusaders' souls prevail not due to sheer strength, but because they cry out in unison and empower each other, each one carrying on the will and resolve of the others. Thus, Part 3's main elaboration to the core conflict is that humanity is defined not by genetics and not by bonds forced, but by bonds chosen. Sure, the blood ties between family members are powerful and sometimes psychic links as seen with the Joestars, but that is nothing compared to the power that is unleashed when humans unite their souls in companionship by choice. It's also important to note that the words human and humanity are at this point completely divorced from the biological Homo sapiens, as one of the souls that contributes to humanity's victory over Dio is a fucking dog. Basically, a human soul is defined by its ability to persevere against adversity alongside other human souls, resonating with their hums in order to summon strength beyond measure. And this strength trumps even absolute power, such as that of Dio Brando. So, if absolute power cannot defeat humanity, what else could? In terms of stakes and scope, Diamond is Unbreakable is a distinct step down from Part 3, being simply about a few scary months in a sleepy Japanese town. And while some see this as a negative, I think it's exactly what the series needed. We just saw a manly muscular battle for the fate of the world, and so by limiting the scope into something smaller, more intimate, we can explore different parts of the series and its ideas. Morio immediately gets to work on evolving that idea of unity that the Star Wars Crusaders established. You see, while the friendships between the Crusaders were cool and real, they were specifically forged in response to a need, birthed from a united, extremely important goal. If you wanted to be dismissive, you could say that these were utility friendships that came to be almost forcefully through the simple existence of a threat so massive that it necessitated cooperation. This is the angle that Part 4's smaller scope instantly begins dissolving, as Morio is home to more shenanigans than it is calamities. While in Part 3, the group united under immense pressure and need, the Coochie Gang in Part 4 spends a lot of time just hanging out and having fun. Many characters are still introduced within dangerous situations, but the majority of friendships, such as Josuke and Okuyasu, blossom outside of fatal conflict. This expands on Part 3's depiction of bonds in relation to the human soul. Humans don't simply seek out connections as a response to threats and as a defense mechanism, but purely because that's what we do. Being human intrinsically means forging connections with others. The weirdos of Morio may be shonen fighters sometimes, but most of the time, they're just dumb goons who derive pleasure from each other's company and who seek that company for no reason other than to enjoy it. In other words, forging bonds isn't a response to a need. For humans, it is the most natural thing in the world. Of course, there is one inhabitant this does not apply to. Yoshikage Kira is the furthest away possible from this ideal of humanity. A loner who would rather simply fade away into the background and never forge any real human connections. This is, by itself, not that terrible, but the purpose he gives this solitary life certainly is. Kira wishes to live free of bonds and thus only guided by his own desires which include the regular murder of women. While that is awful by itself, it also interacts with the humanity we have explored thus far. If the most human thing is to forge bonds, then Kira is committing the most inhuman act possible, as his lifestyle relies on severing the bonds of others. Girlfriends, mothers, daughters, people with a web of bonds and connections just ripped out of existence, leaving the others to pick up the pieces of their shattered humanity. Kira is not just a serial killer, but a sort of cancer that gradually dissolves the human bonds within Morio, both through direct murder and the indirect terror of his actions and mere existence. And yet, he fails. He doesn't get away, doesn't live on to terrorize everyone. In the end, he's defeated by the united power of Morio's community, people who are able to come together and accept each other, pooling their strengths to vanquish this evil. What's cool here is how this differs from Part 3. While the Star Wars Crusaders faced evil because it was their duty and united for that purpose, the town of Morio fends off Kira simply through the fact that they coexist and share their lives, each bond formed paying off directly and indirectly. The slow investigation of Kira after his disappearance leverages every character in town, pressuring Kira until he slips up and as Hayato discovers true nature. And even as he forces himself to evolve into a more powerful type of bomber, Kira makes one fatal mistake that costs him his life. He underestimates just how quickly and resolutely people can help each other through arbitrary and sometimes accidental connections. He fails to foresee that Hayato would manage to call Josuke for help and wake him up in time, a failure that essentially seals his doom. Hayato and Josuke barely knew each other at this point, only interacting very marginally, and yet Hayato was able to trust and believe in Josuke because he was his big hope. Part 4 is very blatant in its core belief that good can come from anywhere, and that people, even scary looking ones, are more often than not ready to do the right thing when push comes to shove. And it is this goodness that manifests across all of these characters, born from the bonds they share and ultimately affirming their invincible humanity. Because humans instinctively connect, their individual strengths and weaknesses matter much less than they should, as the collective, the community, can live up to their shared goals and responsibilities and even withstand the onslaught of a murderous cancer that destroys bonds for its own selfish idea of bliss. But if even a threat to the very bonds that validate humanity couldn't overcome it, what else could? Perhaps the destroyer of this human spirit ought to be someone who doesn't just destroy bonds, but utterly rejects the very idea of them entirely. Someone like Diavolo, who has no past, present, or future beyond his manufactured identity as the Crimson King of Kings. It is pretty telling that whenever a Jojo villain decides to let go of all relationships and bonds, they immediately start mutating into inhuman creatures, with Diavolo being the key example, as his very existence is contradictory and wrong. This Things represents a force so overpowering that it threatens to crush all of humanity under its foot, fate itself. Until now, we have mostly ignored the existence of fate in Jojo, but it is an extremely important element as it exists as a tangible, physical force. Fate is the ultimate factor that decides any one person's destiny, a force that visibly and invisibly guides every living being. How much of this fate is predetermined and how much can be influenced is heavily debatable within the series, but what is an unchangeable fact is that fate is the central deciding force for all of Jojo's stories. And in Diavolo, we have a villain who claims to wield fate as a weapon, who can twist and contort it to always put him on top. If Dio represents absolute power, then Diavolo is absolute control and dominance. And this is the fate the Bucci gang has to oppose. Against a villain who seeks to have no past at all, rises a group of people entirely defined by it. Giorno's Dark Knights, Bucciarati's family, Narancia's betrayal, Mista's misfortune, Abbacchio's corruption, and Fugo's abuse all haunt them and guide who they are, deeply connecting them to their origin. From the very beginning, these are people who are already trying to move forward from something that could have stopped them in their tracks. Giorno is obviously the one to ignite the plot, but all of the modern Crusaders held pain within that they were ready to move on from, to allow it to propel them ever further. Most precarious is of course the past of Trish, who very much tries to move on from it by unraveling it and by figuring out where she came from and what that means for where she has to go now. And it's these desires to go further that defines them in opposition to Diavolo. They don't want to simply erase their ties to their past and manufacture a new identity. They wish to face their fates and seek happiness in their lives, the lives that they were given. This happiness is derived from the satisfaction of moving forward and the joy of sharing that journey with others, as well as the knowledge that their journey is one that leads to justice and truth. The modern Crusaders thus iterate on the idea of humanity's resolve. Moving forward through adversities is not just something we humans do because we can, but because it is an expression of ourselves, a wish for a better future and for the past to heal, a desire given power through our actions and words. We humans move against hardship because to be humans means to carry our baggage into the future and face what awaits us, always hoping to find that which will make us whole. Whether it be a prestigious position, safety for the kids, or just simple happiness, if we have a goal, we will move towards it. And of course, Diavolo fails against this forward momentum, partially because he's alone, but also because he's no one. While Giorno and the gang allow their experiences, their past, their losses to empower them and make them unique people, Diavolo forges no bonds and has no past and seeks no identity. All he has is the belief that he alone can predict and contort fate, and therefore always cheat himself to the top. This belief is ultimately proven wrong when fate favors Giorno and allows him to ascend to Requiem, an ascension once again only possible through the efforts and sacrifices of every member of the gang. It's in essence a similar deal as with Part 3, but more extreme, wherein the mere act of pushing forward against an absolute force allows humanity to persevere, maybe not immediately, but eventually. This victory is more often than not bought with the blood and tears of those that came before, which makes the continued struggle against these inhuman forces all the more prescient in order to honor their inheritance and their wishes. The final words of Vento Aureo emphasize that. Moving forward is the privilege and the duty of the survivors. Throughout parts 1 to 5, Jojo continuously built upon what constitutes as the spiritual aspects of humanity that allow it to persevere against forces beyond its grasp. We have discussed elements of community, of shared and inherited responsibility, of bonds and relationships, of duty and resolve. All of these culminate in the original saga's final part, Stone Ocean. Because now, we, for the first time, get a villain who actually uses some of these elements against our crew. Father Pucci inherits Dio's will, and thus operates as a sort of champion of humanity the way we've discussed. He derives strength from a bond between him and someone else. Not only that, but he continuously moves forward against adversarial situations, and unlike many of the past Jojo villains, he never gives in to despair or mania. He faces his path resolutely, and always uses that which Dio left him to give him strength, courage, and ambition. But more crucially, the goal he sets out to achieve is not a complete severance of bonds, nor does he believe it to be an ultimate position of dominance. Pucci seeks to complete the world and make it into what Dio and him call heaven, a world where everyone already knows their future and can therefore never feel any anxiety over it. This originates from Dio's theory that all humans experience a primeval level of anxiety over the future, and that all vice is born from actions taken to reduce that anxiety. The Heaven Plan would thus guide humanity into a world free from future-directed anxiety, and so in theory, free of evil and suffering, as humans would finally be free to face their fate head-on. As you are surely noticing, this aligns very well with the image of humanity we have thus far been building, specifically the resolve to face fate. And I believe it's because of this that Pucci ends up being the single most successful villain in the entire series. He wins every encounter he has with the heroes save for one, he recovers from every setback, and in the end achieves his ultimate goal while dispatching the entire Joe gang. He is empowered by his bond to Dio and his resolve to bring about a better world, and he's continuously rewarded for it. But does he actually succeed? Not really, as the universe he tried to create exists for a grand total of 5 minutes. Pucci is vanquished by Emporio, despite embodying many of the aspects we defined as key to invincible humanity. How is that possible? It's important to divorce what Pucci thinks he's doing from what he's actually doing. In his mind, Pucci is fulfilling Dio's wish and granting all of humanity tranquility, all of what we've discussed a paragraph before. But in reality, Pucci isn't doing this out of some grand love for humanity. He does it purely out of a single-minded infatuation with Dio and a superlative belief that him and Dio are those that should make this choice for all of humanity. The Heaven Plan isn't salvation, but rather a permanent and wide-reaching choice made for all of humanity without any of their thoughts and feelings factoring into it. Pucci and Dio simply believe that they have the right to drag everyone into this new universe. But moreover, this plan actively castrates humanity of one of their greatest strengths, the ability to move forward in life despite not knowing exactly how it will turn out. Pucci and Dio are so corrupted by how they perceive their anxiety about fate that they attempt to impose their solution to it on everyone, not as a celebration, but as subjugation of humanity and its already precarious element of free will. Compare that to our prison gang. Jolene and Hermes are trying to resolve the pain of their past families. Weather is trying to reclaim his identity. Anasui is just kind of weird. And FF... Let's talk about FF, actually. This being a video that is supremely concerned with the term humanity, FF presents a very fucky situation. In shape, a human. At heart, something else. A big chunk of FF's presence in the story is dedicated to investigating whether or not they have intellect and are thus superior or even equal to humans. This question goes back and forth right up until their death, when their soul takes shape and ascends the same way it has with all characters that have displayed humanity. Just like with Iggy, FF held a human soul despite not being human, and it's worth investigating how that can be possible. I hope it is clear by now that humanity isn't a biological descriptor simply referring to humans, but rather a set of traits that embody what it means to be human, while not excluding anyone or anything from that definition. To be human is to seek out other humans and tie oneself to them, facing one's destiny alongside one's peers. But more specifically, FF reveals that being human is entirely different from merely being conscious or having intellect. The Plankton colony was intelligent for some time before meeting Jolene, but as per their own description, what FF experienced after that point was altogether different. In their final moments, they say that the fact that they are now dying and a unique death that cannot be reversed meant that they truly existed, beyond simple sentience or intellect. I believe this includes FF having a truly human soul, not an intellectual construct, but a spiritual something that made them more. Thus, we finally grasp what humanity truly is in Jojo. Humanity is a quality of the soul. This quality is codified by various aspects: bonds, resolve, emotion, but fundamentally, a human soul is a soul that can believe. A soul is human when it is capable of belief in others and in the time and effort one invests in them. Belief in the future, that despite the world often being cruel and indifferent, a better one is possible. And belief in oneself, that even though fate may be unchangeably horrible, one will find a way to persevere. And beyond that, a belief in that which is inherited, a belief in the beliefs of those that came before and those yet to come. Pucci and Dio superficially qualify, but fail due to their inability to believe in their fellow men. Dio was, from part 1, intellectual to the point of acidity, capable of devising great plans, but unable to comprehend anything on an emotional scale. He speaks in pompous philosophy, but he ultimately doesn't seem to grasp the feelings and concepts behind his own words. To Dio, his thoughts on fate and truth are not really sincere investigations, no matter how much his diary tries to present it as such, but rather displays of a perceived supremacy, steeped in the belief that he's the master, the ultimate taker. Dio feels that someone who's as powerful as him should have thoughts about reality, truth, and humanity, and so he does, but he doesn't ever really grasp what this means on an emotional level. His heaven plan is the same, a theory built off of nothing but conjecture and assumptions about people's emotions, a plan to entirely force them into a new reality built off of nothing but that theory. But more damningly, it is a plan that would rob the world of uncertainty and thus eliminate a key reason we even believe in the first place. Pucci and Dio's plan is anathema to humanity because it entirely rejects the very notion of believing in others or the future. They simply see themselves as the architects of paradise, unable to imagine a reality in which the heaven plan actively weakens humanity and its state of mind. They believe in nothing but their own superiority and thus are unable to reach humanity. This is why every villain fails, including Pucci. Their beliefs entirely center around themselves and their singular existence, and how that existence is the key to everything. And because of this, they continuously underestimate humans, as they can't fathom the power contained within the belief in others and their legacies. In Pucci's case, he gets this close to actually winning when he makes one final miscalculation. In his mind, Emporio is as good as dead, isolated and alone, powerless and meek. And this assumption kills him. A human soul is never cornered, because at any given time, its continued existence is just a current step in a long line of resolve and belief. Emporio does not stand against Pucci alone. With him stand the inherited resolves of the entire Stone Ocean crew, and, to be honest, all Jojo characters that have ever fought against evil. Emporio is the final point in a long line of humans combining the power of their souls in order to bring about a better tomorrow. Emporio is the final step along the path once started by Jonathan Joestar. And thus, fate shifts, Pucci dies, and his heaven universe collapses. The ending of Stone Ocean is often considered tragic. It's understandable. Emporio is stranded all alone in a reformed universe where everyone he has ever known has been replaced and no one but him remembers anything. But I don't know. I think it's actually quite hopeful. After all of these calamities, time-stopping vampires, stripping mafiosos, the very erasure of the universe, we are still here. Humanity perseveres. Not just that, but the better future that every character fought for has come to be. The fight against Io's heritage is over, symbolized by Irene no longer being a Jojo. And all the characters that were replaced seem to have much happier lives. While Emporio is all alone, he seems to immediately be able to reconnect with them, their souls rekindling even across time and space itself. While they may not be the exact people he shared an adventure with, their souls still resonate, and while Emporio will suffer his losses, in time, he too will heal and integrate. But more crucially, his friends and the original universe are actually not gone at all. They live on within Emporio. Just as he carried on their wills when he vanquished Pucci, he now carries their memory, their resolve and belief with him into the new universe. And as he lives, he will impart some of what he has inherited from them and their adventures onto this new world, his new friends, his new family. He will continue this heritage. He really has no choice in the matter, because that is what it means to be human. When I was watching the Stone Ocean anime on Netflix, at some point I just forgot to press the skip ending button, so I just decided to watch it in full for once. It's a very conservative looking ending sequence. Simple drawings of a beach and a sunset. Its plot relevance is marginal. The technical skill at display here is pretty cool, but nothing mind-blowing. And yet, looking at this sequence, I was flooded with both sadness and hope. I can't really describe it. I was just hit by these simple visuals and began wondering why this beach, this view, in combination with Jojo, was making me feel this way. As you have certainly surmised, this entire video was me trying to put those thoughts into words. It's what inspired this. The point of Jojo's bizarre adventure is that the human soul is inherently invincible. That humanity, as a collective, is capable of overcoming every and any obstacle as long as it can form genuine bonds and uphold a sincere belief in its own strength and a better future forged by that strength. And maybe most importantly, the human soul perseveres. Nothing can stop the advancement of it, as its will and resolve is transferable across all souls, across all of time. We aren't invincible because we never fall. We are because we always get up and keep on moving. We, as individuals, may be short-lived, flawed, and fragile. But our greatest strength is that we don't just inhabit space, but time itself. Our wishes can reach far beyond our own lifespans, influencing everyone we bonded with and then influencing any that they bond with. Our ability to move against adversity, combined with our never-ending lineage of heritage, makes us truly immortal, not in a magic sense, but as true spiritual inhabitants of the natural world. Calamity may strike, evil may fester, but at the end of all of it, we will still be here, because we persevere. Is this a very optimistic and kind of blasé take on humanity? Definitely, absolutely. But fuck, man. I think there has to be space in our society for readings like these. It can often feel like the world is not only bad, but constantly getting worse. In the era of the internet media, we are constantly inundated by all the suffering and awfulness in the world, and it's easy to feel suffocated by it. Moreover, it's so fucking easy to fall into this pit of pessimism where nothing seems like it can improve, and thus, nothing is worth fighting for. This is where I think stories like Jojo need to exist. To affirm our value to those that still believe in it, and to extend a hand to those that don't. To remind ourselves that we are not forced to perpetually exist in suffering, that we can unite and move towards making a difference. Yes, these goals may not be achievable within our own lifetimes, but it is our duty and privilege to move forward nonetheless, hoping that we can impart this path to those yet to come. And in the meantime, our journey doesn't have to be one of hardship. While struggle is inevitable, we can fill our lives with people who we can share that path with. And once connected, we can turn each other's pain into laughter, turn the journey, the path, into an adventure. Jojo is a narrative of hope, and I think there's always someone who needs that. To finalize this point, I would like to talk about one scene that I think, above all else, perfectly encapsulates what Jojo really is about. It's the final moments of Part 3, Stardust Crusaders. As they watch Dio's body disintegrate under the dawning sun, Joseph and Jotaro take a moment to just look upon the horizon and contemplate all that they have lost. Not just their comrades, but all the lives stolen by the greed and ambition of a single man. Later, they reconvene with Polnareff to say their goodbyes, they hug, and then they separate. This right here is what Jojo is. These men have just gone through what one could describe as 50 days of hell. A journey halfway across the globe, rife with violence, struggle, and loss. But I don't think any of them would call it that. To these three, those 50 days were not just pain, but joy as well. Amidst the chaos, the devastation, and the death was beauty, camaraderie, and most of all, loads of dumb, goofy bullshit that you can only do with people you truly connect with. While much was lost, so much more was gained. People connected, memories were formed, and most of all, a victory 100 years in the making, a purpose fulfilled, and a peace renewed. All three of these men will inevitably suffer horrible fates. Joseph will deteriorate to the point of inactivity, Polnareff will be mutilated and forced into a half-existence, and Jotaro will alienate those he loves most, only reconnecting moments before oblivion. But that doesn't matter. Their past and futures are what they are, but in this moment, right here, right now, they found happiness in each other's existence. Pure joy in having shared a piece of your life with someone you cherish, and pure elation at having moved towards a better future just a little bit. The memories of the Stardust Crusade, both good and bad, will remain with them forever, shaping them forever. These 50 days of humanity will forever be a part of them, not trauma, but simply a past to be accepted and integrated into their resolve. Because life is not just suffering. It is not just hardship and strife. Life is a wish given form, a hope towards the future, a path shared with those around you, and a resolve both inherited and passed on. But beyond all of that, life is a tragic, beautiful, and supremely bizarre adventure. Thank you everyone so much for watching. This was another big one. And hey, we're back to Jojo at least for one video. I hope you enjoyed. A special thank you to all of our patrons, of course, including Carthair, Fictionape, Zini, PD Fuego, Courage, Eric Nelson, Aaron Camel, Jameson Tate, Luden Ther, Paracha, Pero Skoko, Project Iceman, Wisdom Minari, Makoto 2, Mr. Meander, and Geo. Thank you all, and I'll see you all next time. Be safe and be well, friends.